The reason your church is not growing is not its music. It's not your preaching. There's a lot of truth that has been written over the last decade, but they never intended to put the weight on you. And when you own that, you start feeling like a failure. You start doubting your calling when in reality, you're doing what God called you to do. And you're just at a season where it's time for you to start implementing some very low budget technology that works amazing. You just need a clear plan. You just have to develop a process.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Tech in Church podcast, where we talk to everyday church communicators who use simple tech tools to go from frazzled to focused. My name is Nina Hampton, and I'm here with my co-host, Jeanette Yates, and we believe that you should spend less time worrying about technology and more time doing what you love in your ministry and in your personal life.
Okay. I am so excited. Hey, Nina, how are you?
Hey, I'm good.
I'm really excited about our first episode of season 3. We have invited Robbey Smith from Redemption Church here to talk about assimilation. And, that may sound like, I don't even know what that means. Maybe you don't use that term at your church, but we all try to get people connected. They walk through the front door. Are they walking straight through and out the back door? We don't want that to happen. And so what Robbey Smith is going to talk about today is how he uses technology to stop that from happening and really get people assimilated into the community of his church. And Robbey works or serves at Redemption Church, which he founded in 2005. Hey, Robbey, how are you?
I'm well. Nina, what an intro. Like, you talk about being frazzled to focus. That's pretty awesome.
Yes.
I mean, that's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah.
It is so true. When I heard the word focus, I was like, that's the home run right there, because that is exactly what Text in Church has allowed me to do, is be more focused on the things that I'm gifted at and put on autopilot the things that I'm not so gifted at, or time doesn't allow for as much.
Sure.
But they're imperative. Yeah. So Jeanette, good to meet you. Glad to be on. And season 1, wow, or season 3. Episode 1. So
right.
That means this podcast is going to be at the top of the playlist.
Let's go.
Right?
I love it.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
So I did a brief introduction and just let people know that you are the pastor of the church you founded in 2005. Can you tell us a little bit more about your church and how that all, I know we don't have a long time to record, but I would like to just a little tidbit of how that all happened. Tell us about it.
You have interviewed pastors before, because they can be long.
Right.
So my wife and I started Redemption Church back in 2005, as you mentioned. It's a little rural church. I say rural now. It is rural, and because we are literally in the middle of, we're not in town anywhere. So the very definition of rural is out in the country. So we're on a major highway, but we didn't start there. We started on a main strip. I always say to people, where we started, we didn't know any better, right? So we started on a main drag in a very small town. I think the sign says 8,000, but if it has more than 5, I would be excited, And it was a great town, is a great town, but economy is declining. We went into this little 6,000 square foot storefront building, and that's where we started. And huge, started with 38 people. And week 2, we were at 80 some odd. And then we got to about 120, and all of a sudden we were out of seats. But in 2005, the only people who were doing multiple services were over 1,000 in attendance, and nobody was even talking about that. And so it wasn't even on my radar. Plus, it was the first church I'd ever started. Just really green. Lots of great people were with me, and a few of those 18 years later, just a couple of those are still with us, and some of them are on staff with us. They're just so planted in this little town. And in literally 7 months, we were outgrown that space, and we were looking, and we began to look for the next 3 years for a space. And the back door flew open one day, and this gentleman walks in. Now, we were right next door to a VFW, and I don't know if you know what happens in a VFW during the daytime, but old men who are heroes, right? Who they sometimes drink a little too much, and then they walk in the wrong door, and they walk in our mind. And so that happened on occasion. And this one day, I saw this older gentleman, looked like he could be a vet. He walks in, and he said, "Is Robbey Smith here?" And I thought at first he was a vet going in the wrong door. And I said, "Yeah." And so, long story short, he tells me that he wants to have a cup of coffee with me. And I'm not a coffee drinker, but I'm thinking we're going to walk down the street to one of the stores. He said, and that little voice on your inside says, "Don't get in the car with a stranger," right? And And I heard it screaming, and I started to say, "I'll follow you." And he said, "Just get in with me." And then I heard myself say, "I'll go with you." And I got in his vehicle. My wife was so mad, right? I got in my vehicle. He took me 3.5 miles down the road. About a mile before we arrived, he said to me, "I'm a pastor and I'm transitioning out of the area. I've been watching your ministry for a while, and I've noticed that you have no building, and you have a lot of people with no building. I have a lot of building and no people. God has woken me up twice to give you our property. He gave us this facility. It appraises at 50, or excuse me, it appraised the first year at $3 million. It's 52,000 total square feet." And I didn't know this guy. I mean, I didn't. But I'm telling you that because it matters. We were the outreach kings of churches, right? We did so many outreaches, free gas, full service at gas stations, and washing windows, pumping gas, letting people know about Jesus and redemption, and so we coming to the when we'll get into the story a little bit later, but just know when I say we were a church of 180ish for about a decade, and we spent a decade doing insane, crazy, amazing outreaches. We could have 1,500 people on this site, but our church attendance wasn't any bigger the next day. 180 to 200, and 1,500 people on your place on Saturday. How you not got more on Sunday? And so, but we were there for a decade. So our church, Redemption, yeah, we went. I'll tell you some more of that later, but we're a place where we just talk about Jesus a lot. We see life change. We are, yeah. I think this year. So we're what? This is May. I don't know the date. May 10th, something like that. I think we've baptized 50, and for the year so far, and that's getting ready to get ramped up again. We're getting ready to hit that hard again. So it'll be awesome.
Well, so you started mentioning, you're like, oh, I'm going to save that for later, because when I
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
and I was like, oh, I know what he's getting ready to say. Cause we talked a little bit before on the phone, Robbie, and this is how I knew we had to have you on this podcast, is because you got so passionate
mm,
about this whole experience. Like you said,
Yeah.
yeah,
people were coming for these events. You were meeting people at these outreaches. You were doing all this thing. You were known for that in
yeah,
your community, but yet
yeah,
worship on Sundays was a different experience. And so, can you tell me a little bit about that problem and
yeah.
what you were facing and what you realized that you needed to solve for? So, like, what did
Okay.
you discover was the problem?
Do you know the like in the Christian world, articles, podcasts, YouTube videos, before 2020, for a whole decade there, when we were stuck at that 180 to 200 mark, everything in for pastors and leadership was saying, preach better. Let me give you this seminar on preaching. They were trying to sell things, preach better, preach better, preach better. And I don't understand why we do that. Tim Keller, great pastor, right, in New York. He wrote an article, and it's so true. It's about how pastors have to lead differently and delegate. So on one hand, you had lead differently, and on the other hand, you had preach better, right? And so, my philosophy, I started coming to that crossroads of thinking like, okay, well, if it's preach better, then why don't I do what's best for the church and hire a better preacher? You know what I mean? Why don't we just go that route? Because if that's the thing, then and we've been here a decade at 180, 200. So I'm going through this stuff is running through my mind, and I'm like, dude, I'm delegating people. We got a volunteer staff of like 16, 17 people probably, and I'm like, I don't even know, maybe it's 14, but it's like I'm the only full-time guy. We have a couple part-timers, and one day I'm listening to a podcast, the podcast. So, I'm always, if I'm outside, I'm working, or if I'm driving, I'm always listening to
We
podcasts.
can
And
relate.
I'm listening to Rich Birch's podcast, and he has Greg Curtis on. And huge shout out to Greg Curtis, East Side Christian Church, second fastest growing church in America in 2017. That caught my attention.
Mhm.
And what's so funny though is like when I first heard it, I was listening to his podcast, and his podcast says we need to focus on the new people that God is bringing to your building
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah.
Amen.
And at first I went, wait a minute. I don't want to be inward focused. That's inward focused because remind me, I'm a decade of reach people. Let's
Yeah.
go. And
Yeah.
I got the
Right.
gift, and I got the gift of evangelism. So it's like I got to reach people. We got to, and but then as I listened to it more and more, I put that on save on my Apple podcast. Hit it on save. I must have listened to it 8 times. And after those 8 times, I really started putting numbers on the board, and I said, I spent $170,000 on outreach over the last 10 years. I called my, ragtag, wonderful, amazing staff, and they're all volunteering in an evening. And we talked, and I said, here's all the things we've done. Here's the price tags that come along with them. Here's how much money we've spent over the last decade. Tell me who's in our building because of these things. And they couldn't name 5 families that were with us because of that. And I said, okay, who spends $170,000 on marketing and doesn't have 5 customers or 5 clients because of it? I mean, you're going to change. So we had to have a huge philosophy shift. And so went back to that podcast. We actually paid Greg Curtis to fly. He's in Anaheim, California. Paid him to come to Redemption, this little rural church. He taught our staff for 2 days, and some of our leaders and key volunteers, and he taught us how to assimilate people. I give a shout out to Greg. It's like if you want to know assimilation, Greg Curtis is the guy. I help people all the time, right? I mean, we had a conference here yesterday. We were talking to 20 different pastors about assimilation, text in church, different technology. We were talking about all that, trying to encourage them, guys who are pastoring in churches under 100. One pastor was here he has over 1,000 in his church. And so I'm passionate about those, giving it away, but climbing the assimilations. I mean, if you could ever get Greg Curtis, he is the 5-star guest. But anyway, Greg came, taught us that. We started implementing in 2019. Hadn't found text in church yet. We started implementing that in 2019. So imagine you're implementing something that says you need to identify your guests, because that's the first piece. The best and easiest way to understand assimilation to anybody is this. If you've ever been to a water park and they have a lazy river, that is the greatest analogy, right? You got this one get on place where the lazy river, you just float around.
Yeah.
You're with me, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I live in Florida. We have a lot of lazy rivers.
There you go. Yes. So you grab a raft and you get on one spot. That's the first time guest. They're coming in your building, and you as a pastor and as a staff, you have the responsibility of, as they navigate your church, where do you want them to get off at? And for 10 years, our people were getting off at the back door because we didn't get them plugged in. And it wasn't for lack of effort. Every time somebody gets on the stage, we're going to tell you the 15 things we're doing and how you need to be involved in any of those. Just choose one. But we had no intentionality. We didn't have an intentionality at identifying new people, and we didn't have an intentionality of where we're going to place them. So assimilation for us started without any of the real technology, and it was just trying to identify new people. Well, once we started identifying new people in 2019, it worked. And we went from 200 to 300 probably in about 7 months' time. Get this, in the traditional hiring process at churches, you hire your lead or senior pastor, then you hire your worship guy, then probably somebody over children and students. My second full-time hire was my assimilation guy.
Wow.
That was my second full-time hire. I left my worship guy, who is an amazing leader. I left him, at part-time, because I saw in 7 months, I saw us gain 100 people, and they were plugged in. The number of we call them change makers, volunteers, started going up and up, and we're no longer that 80-20, where 20% do all the work and serve the 80. That just was starting to turn around. And then in June of 2020, I don't even know, Tyler, like, the founder, I saw something somewhere, and I was like, I need to check into this. And I started looking into it, and then I went, and I talked to a couple of my staff, and by then we are now, so I should say this. So we hire our full-time guy, 2019, he's our full-time assimilation guy. In 2020, we're able to hire our full-time worship pastor, right? And so, because the assimilation made that difference. And then in 2020, we go to 2 services on Sunday for the first time in our entire existence, right? And that goes great, except for that's Sunday in March. Yep. I think it's like March something. Yep. And then the very next Monday, guess what happens? Our governor shuts the state down. Yep. And you got to be online only. And I'm like, what the world, And I was going to all this excitement to like, oh my gosh. Yep. And you don't know, and I'm not going to get political, but you just don't know what to believe. Yeah. So you believe, and so it's like, and so I looked at my worship pastor, and every worship pastor is going to cringe and probably say, that's exactly my life. Yes. But I looked at my worship pastor and I said, we have to be online, and we're going to be online only in 6 more days. Yeah. And we have to be online only in 6 days, and it can't suck. That's the reality.
Yeah.
It can't be one
Yep.
camera angle 100 feet away. I said, you can't do this. We've
Yep.
got to. So this is a church that we put 30 grand in that over the next month.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
he built a great deal. And so in 6 weeks, even though the governor hadn't opened up the state, we decided, I had a couple vets, different people who had different issues, and isolation, solitary wasn't good. And I was like, you know what? I don't know. We're going back. So we went back, and so in a time. So get this. This is the part that's amazing. I think I found text in church in June of 2020. We'd been back a few times, a few months then,
Sure.
and I found text in church. I took your default like guest follow up,
Yeah, our
a
template.
6 week follow
Uh-huh.
up template. I took that, we implemented it, made one or two minor changes, like just
Yeah.
personalized stuff for us, like you would encourage everybody to. And and all of a sudden now we're following up with guests that, well, the difference it made is now I have 3 full-time staff people. Our
Man.
church has grown 300%. We led our state in baptisms last year with 135. We've baptized over 300 people in the last 3 years. Average attendance is now 600, 609, 615. And I realized this is what Text in Church did for us. Is before Text in Church, I'm standing at the back door after the service is over, after you preach. It's the worst place. I don't like to stand there because this is what I'm going to hear. Hey, Pastor, great sermon today, as they walk out. Now, I
Yeah.
know all of my sermons aren't great. I know that some of them bomb. I know that.
Right.
And yet people are just kind and nice and they're saying that.
Sure.
But here's my point is like when I shake your hand and you walk out the door, I have zero influence on whether you return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you're a new family moving into this community, and let's just say you have a family of 6 and you move into this community and you come and you're like, man, I like the music. Preaching was okay. Kids ministry was awesome, but I'm going to see what's out there in the community. And so we're going to go somewhere else. Well, guess what? On Friday, before they go to that other church, they're getting a text message from me. I'm out. I'm off on Fridays. I don't even work on Fridays, right? And yet they're Text in Church gives me the ability to reach out and touch them with a personalized, automated follow up. And they look at their phone and say, "Oh, Pastor Robbey just texted. Hey, that guy's not so bad, but we're still going to check out this other church." And so they go there, and then on Monday, guess what happens? Hey, I hope you're having a great week this week, and just a genuine, we care about you. I hope you're having a great week, not an ask, and they're going to do that you guys know this. I'm preaching to the choir, but they're going to do that and get that for 6 weeks. If whose church do you think they're going to go to? At the end of that process. And again, I had a conference yesterday. I'm preaching text in church, planning center, different softwares that we use these things because I'm not in competition with them. I'm just saying, guys, you're really handicapped if you don't have this. And one pastor told me, he said, I won't mention his name. He's a friend of mine for over 20 years. I won't mention his. He'll know if he listens. But and that's okay too. But I won't mention him. I will say this. I tried to get him on board, and at first he told his staff, "I can't afford to do this." And so it was 3 weeks ago. I preached at his church a couple months ago. We did like a pulpit swap thing, and I needed to preach one time. He's a church of about 200 because I was going on vacation with my wife, and I wanted to preach one time on vacation. He could preach for me 3 times, and it would work out. So we swapped pulpits and had a great time. 5 people were baptized that day and saved, spontaneous. It was awesome. But I said hi just like a week ago. I went in, no, 2 weeks ago, I said hi. We changed our verbiage to connection card guessing to just say hi. And so long story short, I said hi at his church like every other guest would do. And then I got an email on that Monday that had a broken link to what they call starting point, which was something that we're trying to help them get started with assimilation. And he his broken link, and that was the only communication I got for him. So I called him and I said, "Hey, dude, did you not like follow up with me because I'm a pastor, or because I know you have volunteers? Did you tell them, or is your follow up process one email with a broken link?" He goes, "I got a broken link." I said, "Yeah, you got a broken link, but is that it?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's kind of it." So long story short, it has made such a difference. I am like really grateful because Easter hit us, Easter and Friend Day. So March 29th till last Sunday night, we have followed up with 128 guests in our church. And the 6 week follow up ended with 128 guests. And since March 29th, our attendance went from 515 this year to now we're around 615. And I attribute that so much to having a first impressions team that really is intentional at getting guest info. And then we do use some technology to help us get guest info as well. And then the follow up and then assimilation. Yeah, God is good, and He's doing a lot of things to these processes and these technologies. So, is that? I mean, when you think about it, 300% at at a time when churches are on the decline. Average church, I read an article of 55. In a time when we faced political divide, we played an election plus all of the political hot topics that came at us, and then it was vaccine or no vaccine, in church, no church, mask, no mask. All of those times that really should have destroyed, because we had great follow up and software that allowed us to connect with people, and a great assimilation. We are now one of the fastest growing churches in our state.
Yeah.
And so yeah. That's you have to cut me off.
No. Well, I have follow-up questions, Robbie. I've been taking notes,
right,
in my brain.
Right.
And so I do want to just take a step back. So you basically told us everything we want to know.
Yeah.
But I want to break it down just so our listeners, our guests, will kind of be able to take that and because what Robbie just said sounds like something you're reading out of the Bible where the sea is parting and it's a miracle, right?
Like an upper room experience.
Yes. But what, and yes, every, we know that God moves in and through all things. Yes. However, what I really like about what you said is you were doing all churches do some form of assimilation. I joked at the beginning, you may not know what that is. You may call it something different, but we all try to get people connected, right? And so you can do that without technology. However, when you are, first of all, now there is a difference between, like, you can have technology, but not an assimilation plan, and then it doesn't do any good either. So you have to have that plan.
Yes.
And so, like you said at the beginning, you were doing outreach, but not gathering the information and then following up with these people to get them connected and then assimilate them into your church community. So that was the first step that happened. And then, that was working to an extent, but then when Text in Church came along and you added that technology piece, that helps you be way more efficient, and fewer people are slipping through the cracks. Would that be a safe?
You cannot follow up. You cannot follow up with 128 people for a 6-week period.
Yeah.
Right.
2 touches for 128 people for a 6-week, 2 touches a week. No way possible. You can't do it.
Yeah.
Text in Church, you can do it.
And it sounds like in order to be able to sustain that kind of growth, you know what I mean? There has to be a system in place for it. And I think one thing about your story, Robbie, and just the story of your church is, like, you guys did an incredible job, like, telling people about the gospel and the truth of Jesus, right? But, like, and this is even something that, like, me and my husband and some of our friends have just, like, talked about, is the importance of godly community. You know what I mean? And so, like, that's great. I can get, like, getting people in the door and like, just in the door of the kingdom. That's kind of like what we say. You know what I mean? Like, they're just in the door of salvation. That's great. That's awesome. But there's a whole lot more in here. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a whole, like, there's a whole house with rooms and that you can explore and be a part of, like, that you can make your home here. And it sounds like that's what you guys have worked on. That's why the growth in your church has happened, because it's like the house of Redemption Church has become a home for so many that didn't have a community, that didn't have a home. You know what I mean? In that way, in order to partner so that they can tell others, you know what I mean, about the truth of Christ. You know what I mean? Which is, and I think for us, like, being on the Text in Church team, like, these are the stories, like, I have a lot of makeup on, and this is the first day of our video podcast, so I'm trying to keep it together. But, like, if I would let myself, if this was just audio, I would be a mess. I would be a boohooing mess, because these are, like, this is our why. This is my why.
Yes.
Why I'm on this team is because like the emails that I get from our members asking me, how do I send a message? How do I set up a workflow? The Zoom meetings that I have with people, it's so that stories like yours, Pastor Robbie, of your church, so that exists.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So that actually, those stories are real. So that, because there's real people attached to them. You know what I mean? We just look at the list of our numbers, the amount of emails that come in a day, but there are stories behind each and every one of them. So just you taking the time to share this with us is just such a privilege. I just have to say that.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that. And we did have to kill some things. Like, there's no lie. We stopped almost instantly doing all the outreaches, and we literally started focusing. You remember there's a guy that he's in heaven now, Henry Blackaby. You
Yes.
remember what Experiencing God?
Yes.
Henry Blackaby, this is one of the sayings he said in his teaching. He said, churches are so guilty of saying, God, come bless us. He said, what churches ought to do is see what is God doing and then get behind that. And so our vision shifted from let's go out and try to get people to let's focus on the very new people that God is bringing to our building and get them plugged into places. And so we had to kill stage announcements. Like, 2 announcements are given in our church. And one of the beauties of the whole 2020 COVID thing is that everybody started using QR codes.
Yes.
That Apple and Android devices
What a
started building
comeback to that
into their
technology.
default system.
I know.
Yes. And because nobody would use it, you had to download this little stupid app.
Right.
And so, but now when you walk into our doors, we have a team of, I think on Sunday mornings, probably a team of 12, and they are looking for new people, and they bring them over to one place. This is part of our assimilation. You bring them over to one place and you ask them to say hi. You give them a gift. Our gift box is like $20 is what it costs us per family, so it's nothing big. And then, but you get their info, and what they're doing is they're signing them into Text and Church in that moment. If we have a new family that comes in the door and they have kids, and they go over to our kids check-in area, and they're a new family and they're getting plugged in, they're getting plugged into Planning Center, because that's what we use for, services for programming and things. But one of the beautiful things is, like, we don't take them from the kids check in and say, oh, they're a new family, and then bring them over and put them in Text and Church and make a new family have to register all over again, right? All we do is we simply export every week. We export from Planning Center, and we import that into our Say Hi group in Text and Church. And all of a sudden, even though they didn't technically say hi, they are now getting 6 weeks worth of follow-up, the parents, because you will capture the parents' phone number and email, and that's all we care about: phone number, email, name. And so, so it made it so simple. And then when you get in the building, in the worship center, if our team didn't catch you, we use Subsplash for our website, and Subsplash gives you a place to do sermon notes. And so I use that there's like literally one graphic that goes up on the screen the entire time I'm preaching. I don't put Bible passages up there for them to follow along, because I want them to aim. And the service always begins with, hey, if you're new to Redemption, please say hi. That's getting them in Text and Church. Hey, if you've been here a minute and you want to get connected, you want to have fun, make friends, and we have a 3-weekend experience called Next Steps. That's our assimilation process. Scan this code. It'll take you to a website. You can sign up for Say Hi, sign up, and then at the very bottom, there's a sermon outline. And when they click sermon outline, guess what's in the top? Place for them to say hi, a little blue link in case they didn't do it, right? And then our church is reading the text. Like, I'll bold some words, and I'll encourage them to read with us. So you may not do it the first time you get here, but if you want to be a part of the fun in the worship service, reading the word together, certain words, eventually you'll get there and you'll do it, and people will say hi. And but we don't give 15 options. We're creating a lazy river,
right?
And the only option is Next Steps. Get them there.
That's a great analogy.
So I've heard a couple things that you've just said, and I just want to recap them. One of the things is you're very intentional about your assimilation. So, you have a plan, like we talked about. You can have a tool, but if you don't have a plan, it doesn't do any good. So you have a plan.
Yes.
It's very specific. And like you said, lazy river style, one way in. But you give them multiple options for the same entry point. So there's not, it's okay. So some people sometimes get that confused. Like, am I supposed to have multiple options, or am I not supposed to have multiple? That can be confusing. So you want to have one entry point into getting into a follow-up, getting started in that assimilation process for them.
Yeah.
But you want to have multiple ways they can access, several different ways. If you go to Robbey's church, that you can say hi, and several different options. So you might have walked past the other ways, but there's going to be a few more points. So I really like that. And then the second thing I was thinking about is assimilate them into what? Like, so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have an assimilation plan, but you
Yes.
part of that is what are you inviting them into? And Nina
Hmm.
touched on this a little bit with like you're inviting them into that community, and you just gave that great illustration. Is like people start wanting to be like, I want to say the words, I want to do that. That sounds
Yes.
fun, and so they
Yes.
get into it. But also, you mentioned something when you were talking about this, how your not only your guests follow up is increasing, but your serve team, your
Yeah.
what did you
Yeah.
call them? You had
The
a great name.
So we have change makers.
Change
So,
makers.
yeah.
And
yeah.
more people
Yeah.
start serving, which is part of what you're asking people as they assimilate into the community. You invite them to serve, you invite them to
Yeah.
into a Bible study, you invite them to learn more about becoming a Christian, whatever that happens to be. That's part of
Uh,
what you're doing. That's what you're assimilating them into. So you also want to be strategic about, okay, what are we going to, once we get their information,
Yeah.
what are we going to invite them to
where
other
do you
than
want
just,
them to go?
yeah,
Where do you want
like,
them to go? Yeah. So let me say one thing. We'll clarify one thing, and maybe another analogy. The funnel can be big. I think is what you're
yeah.
saying, Jeanette.
Mm-hmm.
Is the funnel can be big, but it brings them to that one place, which is what we call next steps, which is our assimilation. So when they come into the room for assimilation, this is the magic. It's 20 minutes of content, and it's 40 minutes of fun. Icebreakers. I mean, if there's not laughter coming from that room, as people sit around round tables, because the whole goal of that process is to get them to make friends with one another, and so because at a church of at 100, you'll know. I spoke with the pastor the other day. At 100 people in the church, oh, I know every guest that comes in. I got you. But at 200, you won't know. You will have no clue how many people that are new and are slipping through the cracks. So you have to get people connected with one another. And then what you're saying is so true. Assimilation's plan is so we do a 3 weekend experience. The first week, we're going to share the gospel. That's the 20 minutes of content. And we do that in the story of this is how I, at age 26, met Jesus. And this is how we started the church. This is God's story in the church. And then we say God's story in your life as well. And we share one or two Bible passages from Romans, share the gospel with them. And again, they're having fun. So they're going to come back the next week, sit at the same room in the same table with the same people. There may be 12, 15 people, 8, 6 people, I don't know, depending on who signed up that week, but they're literally going to sit around the table and the goal is to have fun. We'll have gift cards that you give away for the games that we're playing because it's got to be fun, right? And they're building relationships. And week 2, they're going to hear about community, the importance of being in a small group and being on a daily reading plan, personal disciplines, community. But then week 3, and that's what you're getting at, Jeanette, is week 3 when they'll take a tour, and this is so powerful. If you can figure this out, like how to do this in your church. But we walk out. One day I was watching a tour happen, and one of our volunteers and leaders in Next Steps was giving a great tour. She was in the foyer, and she's talking about here's where you serve coffee, here's where you open doors, here's where guests comes in, here's where kids check in is. And I listened to her talk about that, and I said, "Hey, you mind if I interrupt you for just a moment?" She said, "Oh, sure, Pastor Robbie." And I said, "Let me tell you something. There are a lot of tasks in this foyer, a lot of tasks. But this job is not about the task. Anybody can make coffee, anybody can check it. We can teach you those things in 5 minutes or less." I said, "There's nothing hard here. The thing I want you to realize is, and this is a very true story, is this morning in the 11 o'clock service, there's going to be a young lady walk into this room, into this building. And I know this because I'm her pastor. 10 days ago, after a decade of marriage, her and her husband decided to call it quits. She's coming here. And guess what? 3 days ago, she got diagnosed with breast cancer. But she's going to come here. It's not about giving her coffee. It's about making her feel welcome. And it's about loving on her. Let me give you a coffee. Let me cheer you up. Let me pray for you. Let me just love on you a little bit. And by the way, do you mind saying hi? And take that person over to the hello desk. Give them a gift. They're going to give us their info. We're going to follow up with them for 6 weeks. And, uh, you know, that's what this is about. And so when they get done with that tour and they're going to every ministry and they're hearing the big picture that way of what every ministry, the power behind that. And then they walk back into a room and there's a piece of paper sitting on a round table they've been sitting at the whole time. And it has 4 or 5 options. And it says, where would you like to try serving one time? Because Jesus didn't come to be served. He came to serve. we are created in his likeness and we're born again, regenerated, his spirit is in us. We have to, there's a need. We need to serve like our master. And so you need this. It's not that we need this from you. We have 206 people serving, but you need this. So where would you like to try once? We're not locking you in for a year. Where do you like to try once? They will check the box. They will check the box. And then our ministry staff has 1 week to get them scheduled, like within 7 to 10 days, they have to be on a schedule. And you're like, wait a minute, I already got my schedules built out. Awesome, but you can have 2 people doing this. You can have, and so when that's over, then there's a follow up. Hey, what did you like in kids ministry, or how did you like pointing a camera in the media team, or how did you like with first impressions, or whatever it is. And they said, yeah, I like that. Can I put you on a schedule? And what you've just done is you've taken somebody who may have walked in your door 5 weeks ago, and 2 weeks later they got into your lazy river. And you, as the lazy river ends, there's one place to get out, and that one place right now for us is serving. And so that's where we want them to go. In the future, I will tell you, there's going to be a couple exits. One will be small groups and intentional. Here's a leader, you can go try that. So we're going to be, it's always developing and always growing, but that's where we're at now. There's a reason that theme parks and any place where you can go and drop a ton of money, right, with your kids, when they let you out of the park, do you know what's at the exit? Always. It happens in the grocery store. Yes. Churches have to be wise, like harmless is wise like servants, harmless like doves. It's like you've got when you let somebody out of next steps, you've got to let them out in a place you want them to go through. And we want them to go through serving, because when they get in serving, they go from just checking this church out to now I have a responsibility to be there and I get to be a part of God's work.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'm blown away, Nina. I don't know about you.
I am too. Now I'm more fired up. I think I'm more like I'm trying real hard to keep myself from shouting.
Let's just go to church right now. Let's just have some church. Let's break it down. Let's get some Bible going.
I mean, Robbie, this has been such a inspiring but empowering talk. I think not just for our listeners. We hope that it inspires and empowers them. But we are both. I don't know. I'm going to let you speak for yourself, Nina. But I am reminded of why I do what I do at my church, right? And so this has just been a great conversation. Nina, share your thoughts. Share your thoughts on it.
I mean, I think that this is why I say that I'm fired up. A lot of the language that you use, Pastor Robbie, is like the same language. You know what I mean? Maybe different wording, right? We're probably in different areas of the country, but like the same heart behind everything of why my husband and I serve at the church that we do. And like we've had those exact talks. Like one of the things that my pastor says, he's also a great friend of my husband and I, that he says is like, that new person that you don't know that's coming in the door, treat them like the other person that you've been praying for to come to Christ for the last 10 years. Like, you know what I mean? And that's the why. You can look at it. I also help like lead our production team, like at our church and, on Sunday mornings. So sometimes I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off, and it's really easy to get caught up in the task.
Frazzled to focused, Nina. Frazzled to focused.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's
there
really
you go.
Easy to get caught up in all of the things. Okay, I need to make sure that the iPad is live streaming on YouTube right, and is the audio right, and you know what I mean? Like, does the worship team have everything that they need? And it's really easy to get caught up in all of that. And I forsake that why of why we're doing this. It kind of takes the heart out of it. Yeah. You know what I mean? And thankfully, by the grace of God, Jesus will still use that. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But I want to partner with what he's doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want to partner with what God is doing in the room. And so I think just hearing like your story is a story of stewardship, of good stewardship.
Speaking of stewardship, though, when you learned, you were pouring out this money and it wasn't, there was not the fruit that you needed to, that you felt was necessary for your ministry, you switch that. And, you mentioned that your gifts are $20, that you give people. At some churches, that's like, the whole budget for the year for all
it can be $2. It can be a jar of jelly,
right.
Give them jelly. A reason to give you their info,
Jelly. I'm coming. But like that is a good way to say, okay, let's reallocate some of those funds so we can pay for these $20 gift
Yeah.
gifts that we
Yes.
can give people or whatever, you know.
Well, and I think even before that, like the fact that once you realized, because half of the struggle I think of ministry a lot of the times, like my husband and I have been in ministry for a while, right? Probably not as long as you, but a while, and we've seen like it's not just identifying the issue, but doing what's necessary to change it. And I think that, like seeing that, like you're like, okay, I don't know what it is I'm doing wrong until you listen to this podcast. You heard this guy who had the answers. And not only did you implement whatever he was saying, you brought him out and had him teach your team. That's a big deal. Like that's a big deal. And that's why I say that it's a story of good stewardship.
Right.
You know what I mean?
This
Because
reminds me too, Nina, of Mike Elliott, one of our other guests that we had on the podcast, where he, was in between. He was in transition between two different. He didn't have a current assignment. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
And he did not let that stop him from sharing things that he had learned, just like you're doing. And so I think that is a good example of not only stewarding your monetary, your financial resources, but also sharing what you've learned to help other people, to help other pastors stop spinning their wheels.
I'm going to tell you something. Guys are wore out. Pastors are. I saw something the other day where so many leaders and pastors are leaving the ministry, and this is what technology will do for you. And this is the scare, right? Oh, I'm going to have to learn something new, and I don't have the time and energy to do that. But here's the reality: what Text and Church, Planning Center, what Subsplash has empowered us to do is we're able to get back to the thing. Because Nina, you talked about it a second ago. It gives us the ability to get back to what Jesus really called us to do. Because here's the truth, which is people, love on people, love God, love others, and serve people. And but what happens is as we grow, if you don't allow technology to take over something, because here's the deal, if you don't know till you actually try it out for the first time, but you are going to give technology like Text in Church, you're going to give them the ability to text people and communicate with them so that you can do other things. You're going to give Planning Center the ability to schedule people so that you can be with those folks again, right? That you can, and I'm not going to run around the room looking for new people because now I have a team of people that I can be there to preach the word and pray for our congregation. It's better stewardship of your time. And, maybe last story. I don't know how much time we have, but last story. I shot. So you remember it was this podcast. We did a podcast earlier on the Hope Ministry.
Yeah, well, you did a video for us so that we could share that with our audience.
Yes.
So if you're
so the Hope Canister. So let me tell you let me give you a little that video that we shot. At the end, I said, hey, if you have any questions about what we talked about, reach out to me at rsmith@redemptionnow.com. I'll be glad to. I had like 10 or 12 pastors reach out, starting that ministry, right? A ministry just like that. And then one church said, hey, can we help get this set up? And we started talking about assimilation, next steps, and I started talking to them about our strategy. I call it the Easter playbook, what we do 5 or 6 weeks before Easter to maximize the number of people that are in your building. And this church is in Nebraska, Prairie Lane Church in Nebraska, a little bit under 100 people. I've never been to Nebraska, but I did 2 Zoom calls with them. Me and the assimilation pastor probably did 3 or 4 phone calls with them. We got them set up. I got a text the other day. It was the week after Easter, maybe that Monday after Easter. And he said 26 new people showed up at our church. This is how he said it. 26 new people showed up and said hi, which is our verbiage, which means because they bought Text in Church, because when he had them say hi, he did exactly what we did. Now they're in the system in a 6-week follow-up, that template that you all had. And then he said to me, and these are guys in their 60s and 70s, and it's an older congregation. He said to me just yesterday in this conference, I'm teaching pastors about this. I got another text message, and he said, I had 6 people go through step 1. I had another 8 people join step 2 of next steps. At the end of this, we're going to have, I think he said somewhere around 10 or 12 new people serving in the church. And he was asking questions about that 3rd step because we've told him, make it your own, take a bit of piece. What we're doing, we just want to help you get started. And so the reality is technology doesn't care if you're contemporary or traditional, doesn't care if you're 1,000 people or if you're 100 people. Technology like Text in Church, Planning Center, these things, they're affordable. You don't have to have a year-long subscription. Try it for a stinking month. See if it doesn't pay off. You know what I mean? It will pay for itself. I'm just telling you, it'll pay for itself. And I attribute guest follow-up and Text in Church, our assimilation. So guest follow-up with Text in Church and our assimilation that we got from Greg Curtis, Climbing the Assimilations. I think they're the reason why God works through process. And I think those things are the reason why we're one of the fastest growing church. We got to be one of the fastest growing, probably might be the fastest growing church in this season in our area. It's why the baptisms, I've got more small group leaders than I've ever had. And I've asked no one to do that. It's what happens when you get people plugged in. And so the point is, you just have to let technology trust. I will say this. It was a bit, when I first started, like the first month, I was like, people were walking in the door in a church our size. I didn't know, I knew their faces, but I didn't know their names. And they would say, "Hey, Pastor, got your text?" And I'm like, "You don't even have my number. What are you talking about?" And
it's a little bit of a shift.
It is. And then I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute. This is Text in Church. This is what they're talking about."
Yeah.
And I mean, that happened a dozen times before I caught on. I was like, and at some point I tell them, I did send that text, but that is not my cell phone number. Don't text me back thinking that I'm going to get that. I can, but I've got somebody else that looks at those. And so, yeah. Anyway, got to let technology help you out.
Yeah.
Pastor Robbey, this has been just the richest time, and just hearing about your story, your church, everything. I think to wrap up our time together, if there was encouragement that you would give to an overwhelmed pastor, overwhelmed church communicator who's like, I don't even know where to start, what to do, what would you say? Just a little snippet of encouragement.
I would say that the reason your church is not growing is not its music. It's not your preaching. You were never, I don't think the articles and the podcasts I don't think anybody's ever attention was to put that weight on you as a pastor or a leader, that it's your ability and you're the bottleneck. And, there's a lot of truth that's been written over the last decade, but they never intended to put the weight on you. And when you own that, you start feeling like a failure. You start doubting your calling, when in reality, you just need a clear plan. Your preaching, my preaching is not better than anybody else in this area, right? There are guys who have a lot smaller churches that I believe bring the word better than I do. You just have to develop a process. If you want our help, it's rsmith@redemptionnow.com. I mean, it's free. I'm here to help the kingdom grow. So we'll figure it out. We'll help you. We don't. I've even offered to send our assimilation pastor on our dime to churches to help them get that started. It's just so what I would say to you is, quit wearing that and feeling like you're a failure, when in reality you're doing what God called you to do, and you're just in a season where it's time for you to start implementing some very low budget technology that works amazing. And I promise you, whether you're in Nebraska, Illinois, whether you're in a metropolitan area, you need this, because it's going to give you, we're following up with 128 guests, and guess what? I was out mowing my lawn when that was happening. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's automated, it's personalized, and it's a home run. So,
well, Robbie, you are such a gift to our community and to your community, and we will make sure, since you just said it on the podcast, to have a way that people can contact you in our description here of the podcast. But we are going to wrap up today's show. Thank you so much for your time, and like I said, we're going to have to go. We're going to have to process all this because it's been so wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'll be reaching out to you soon. And I'll make sure, like I said, that we'll allow people to reach out to you as well.
Jeanette and Nina, great to meet you guys. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time, Robbie. That's a wrap on today's show. We'd love to hear how your church gets new people integrated into your ministries. Head over to the comments of this video to share your assimilation tips or questions.
And if you want to know how tech tools like Text in Church can help you spend less time worrying about technology and more time doing what you love in your ministry and in your personal life, make sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to this episode so you won't miss out on future episodes. Thanks a lot.